Welcome to Legends at Midnight, where legends breathe in silence. Tonight's tale is Zeus, king of the gods' power, lovers, thunderbolts. If you've already subscribed and left a like, let's begin. High above the mortal realm, where clouds gather and lightning splits the sky, sits a throne carved from the very essence of power itself. Upon this seat of ultimate authority rests Zeus, the thunder-bearer, the king of Olympus, the ruler whose voice shakes mountains and whose gaze commands the respect of gods and mortals alike. The story of Zeus begins not with triumph, but with darkness. In the time before time, when the world was young and chaos ruled the heavens, the titan Kronos held dominion over all creation. This ancient god, driven by a terrible prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, devoured each newborn the moment they drew breath. One by one, he swallowed his offspring whole, condemning them to an eternal prison within his own being. But fate, as it often does, found a way to flow around even the mightiest obstacles. When Zeus was born to the Titaness Rhea, she could no longer bear to watch another child disappear into her husband's maw. With desperate cunning, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Kronos, who swallowed it without pause, believing he had consumed yet another threat to his rule. The real Zeus, meanwhile, was spirited away to the island of Crete. Hidden in a cave on Mount Ida where the sounds of his cries were masked by the clashing of bronze shields wielded by dancing warriors called the Curetes. There, in the depths of the earth, nursed by the goat Amalthea and tended by nymphs, the future king of the gods grew strong. The cave where Zeus spent his earliest years was no ordinary hollow in the rock. It pulsed with ancient magic, its walls embedded with crystals that caught and reflected the faintest light, creating a constellation of stars in the underground darkness. The air itself seemed alive with potential, thick with the scent of wild honey and the metallic tang that precedes a thunderstorm. Here, surrounded by the primal forces of nature, Zeus learned his first lessons in power. As he grew from infant to child to young god, Zeus displayed abilities that marked him as extraordinary even among the divine. When he laughed, small bolts of electricity would dance between his fingers. When he was angry, the cave would rumble as though the earth itself shared his displeasure. The goat Amalthea, who had given him her milk, found her horns growing heavy with fruit and flowers, blessed by proximity to such concentrated divine energy. The nymphs who cared for Zeus told him stories of the world above, painting pictures with their words of blue skies and rolling seas, of forests thick with ancient trees and meadows carpeted with flowers that bloomed in colors beyond naming. They spoke too of the darkness that ruled there, of Kronos the devourer, whose reign cast shadows across creation itself. In young Zeus's heart, a fire began to burn, not the destructive flame of mere anger, but the steady, determined heat of justice seeking its rightful place. When Zeus reached the fullness of his divine strength, he emerged from the cave that had sheltered him. The world he stepped into was beautiful beyond measure, yet wounded. The very air seemed to carry whispers of suppressed power, of gods trapped within their father's belly, of potential locked away from the light. The sun, though it shone, seemed somehow dimmer than it should be. The seas, though they moved with their eternal rhythms, lacked the vibrant energy that should have danced upon their waves. Zeus understood immediately that he could not face Kronos alone. Raw power, even divine power, was not enough to overcome a titan who had ruled for eons and grown strong on the essence of his devoured children. Instead, Zeus employed cunning, the same quality that had saved his life when he was a helpless infant. He sought out Métis, a titaness whose name meant wisdom, and whose counsel was sought by gods and mortals alike. Métis was beautiful in the way that intelligence itself can be beautiful, not merely in form, but in the elegant way her mind could perceive patterns invisible to others, could find solutions where none seemed to exist. When Zeus approached her with his desperate plan, she listened with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of all understanding. Together, they devised a potion that would cause Kronos to vomit up the children he had swallowed. The brewing of this mixture was itself an act of profound magic. They gathered herbs that grew only in places where lightning had struck, water from springs that had never seen sunlight, and honey from bees that fed on the nectar of flowers that bloomed only under the full moon. Each ingredient was chosen not just for its physical properties, but for its symbolic resonance with the act of reversal, of undoing, of bringing back what had been lost. The potion, when complete, shimmered with an opalescent light that seemed to shift and change as one looked at it. It tasted, according to the later accounts of Kronos himself, like the essence of regret mixed with the bitterness of inevitable change. Zeus presented himself to his father not as a challenger, but as a servant. Disguised and humble, he offered the potion as wine, claiming it was a gift from a grateful mortal king. Kronos, suspicious by nature but also arrogant in his certainty of his own power, drank deeply. The effect was immediate and violent. From the depths of the Titans being came first Hestia, goddess of the hearth, stumbling into the light like one awakening from a long and troubled dream. Then Demeter, who would govern the harvest, her hair still tangled with grain that had somehow continued to grow even in that place of eternal darkness. Hera emerged next, her eyes flashing with the fury of imprisonment, already planning the revenge that would consume much of her divine existence. Hades followed, pale as marble but with eyes that held the depth of every secret ever buried. Poseidon came last of Zeus's siblings, and as his feet touched the earth, every ocean on the planet responded with waves that crashed against shores in celebration of his freedom. But the liberation of his siblings was only the beginning. Kronos, realizing what had occurred, roared with a voice that shattered mountains and caused the very foundations of the earth to tremble. The war that followed would be known to history as the Titanomachy, a conflict so vast and terrible that its echoes would shape the world for all time to come. The battle was not merely one of strength against strength, though the displays of raw power were awesome to behold. When Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, they split the sky itself, leaving tears in the heavens through which divine light poured down upon the earth. When Kronos struck back, his blows created valleys and chasms that remain to this day as reminders of that cosmic struggle. But Zeus had learned wisdom during his years of hiding. He understood that victory would come not through force alone, but through alliance and strategy. He freed the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants whom Kronos had imprisoned in the depths of Tartarus. These master craftsmen, grateful for their liberation, forged for Zeus the thunderbolts that would become his signature weapon, not mere bolts of lightning, but condensed divine wrath that could pierce any defense and strike down any foe. The thunderbolts were works of art as much as weapons of war. Each one was unique, crafted with care and imbued with specific purposes. Some were designed to kill, their electric fire capable of reducing even a god to ashes. Others were meant to stun, to subdue without destroying. Still others carried within them the power of revelation, able to strip away illusions and force truth into the open. Zeus also freed the Centimanes, the hundred-handed giants whose strength was matched only by their fury at their long imprisonment. These beings became his most fearsome allies, able to hurl boulders with each of their many hands simultaneously, creating storms of stone that darkened the sky and reshaped the landscape with their impact. The war raged for 10 years, a decade during which the very concept of time seemed to stretch and distort under the pressure of such cosmic forces in conflict. Mortals, when they dared to look upward, saw skies that changed color constantly, now red with divine blood, now black with the smoke of battles fought among the clouds, now brilliant white with the flash of Zeus's lightning illuminating scenes of struggle too vast for mortal minds to fully comprehend. During this time, Zeus learned the full extent of his powers. The thunderbolt was his most obvious weapon, but he discovered that his dominion over the sky included command of all weather. He could summon storms that would rage for days, their winds strong enough to uproot forests and their rains heavy enough to flood entire regions. He could also bring clear skies and gentle breezes, demonstrating that his power was not merely destructive but creative as well. More subtly, Zeus began to understand his role as a king. Leadership, he learned, was not simply about being the strongest or the most feared. It required the ability to inspire loyalty, to make difficult decisions, and to bear the weight of responsibility for the welfare of others. His siblings, freed from their father's belly, looked to him not just as their liberator but as their leader. This trust was both a gift and a burden that Zeus would carry for the rest of his eternal existence. The turning point of the war came when Zeus managed to convince several of the younger Titans to join his cause. These gods, who had grown weary of Kronos' tyrannical rule, brought with them not just their power but crucial knowledge of their father's weaknesses and strategies. When victory finally came, it arrived with the sudden finality of a thunderclap. Kronos, weakened by years of constant battle and betrayed by some of his own children, found himself overpowered by the combined might of Zeus and his allies. The moment of his defeat was marked by a silence so profound that it seemed the entire universe held its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Zeus faced a choice that would define his entire reign. His father lay beaten before him, the same being who had devoured his siblings and cast shadows across creation. Justice demanded punishment, but what form should that punishment take? The young god understood that his decision would set the tone for his rule and establish the principles by which he would govern. Rather than destroying Kronos entirely, Zeus chose a punishment that was both merciful and decisive. He cast his father into Tartarus, the deepest realm of the underworld, where he would remain imprisoned for eternity. This decision demonstrated both Zeus's power and his restraint. He was strong enough to choose mercy even when revenge might have seemed more satisfying. With the defeat of the Titans, Zeus and his siblings faced the monumental task of reorganizing creation itself. The world they had inherited was vast and complex, requiring divine oversight in countless areas. Rather than attempting to govern everything himself, Zeus demonstrated the wisdom that would characterize his best moments as a ruler by dividing the cosmos among his brothers. The division was accomplished through the ancient practice of drawing lots, a method that removed personal preference and potential conflict from the decision. Zeus drew the sky and became lord of the heavens. Poseidon received the seas, becoming master of all waters and the creatures that dwelt within them. Hades was given dominion over the underworld, becoming ruler of the dead and guardian of the earth's hidden wealth. This division established one of the fundamental principles of Zeus's reign, the recognition that effective rule sometimes required the sharing of power. Unlike his father, who had sought to control everything through fear and force, Zeus understood that delegation could strengthen rather than weaken his authority. The establishment of Olympus as the seat of divine power was Zeus's next great act as king. The mountain chosen for this purpose was no ordinary peak, but the highest point in the known world, its summit perpetually shrouded in clouds that served as both a boundary and a symbol of the distance between the divine and mortal realms. Zeus transformed the peak of Olympus into a realm of impossible beauty. The very air there was different from earthly atmosphere, clearer, somehow more substantial, carrying within it the essence of immortality itself. Structures arose that defied mortal understanding of architecture. Buildings that seemed to be carved from crystallized light and founded upon clouds that had been given the solidity of stone. The great hall where Zeus held court was a marvel that would inspire awe even among gods. Its ceiling was the sky itself, showing not the limited view available from any earthly location, but a panoramic vista of all heavens simultaneously. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns that shifted to reflect the cosmic forces at play in any given moment. The walls were made of a substance that was neither quite metal nor quite stone, but something that combined the strength of both with a beauty that surpassed either. Zeus's throne, placed at the hall's center, was carved from a single massive piece of lapis lazuli that had been struck by lightning and transformed into something beyond any earthly mineral. The chair itself seemed to pulse with contained energy, and when Zeus sat upon it, small sparks of electricity would dance along its arms and back, creating a constantly shifting pattern of light that reflected his mood and power. From this seat, Zeus began the work of establishing laws and customs that would govern both gods and mortals. Unlike the arbitrary rule of the Titans, Zeus sought to create a system based on principles that could be understood and, within limits, predicted. He established the concept of guest friendship, which made the protection of travelers and strangers a sacred duty. He codified the proper relationships between mortals and gods, defining how worship should be conducted and what obligations each party owed to the other. But Zeus was not merely a lawgiver and administrator. As his power grew and his confidence in his rule solidified, other aspects of his divine nature began to manifest more strongly. Chief among these was his legendary attraction to beauty in all its forms, an attraction that would lead to some of the most famous and complicated stories in all of mythology. The first and most significant of Zeus's romantic entanglements was with Hera, his sister and eventual queen. Their relationship was complex from the beginning, marked by genuine affection, but also by the political necessities of divine rule and the complications that arose from Zeus's wandering eye. Hera was beautiful in the way that sovereignty itself was beautiful, regal, commanding, with a presence that demanded respect and admiration. Her hair was the color of polished bronze, and her eyes held the deep blue of the sky just before dawn. When she moved, it was with the grace of absolute confidence, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of one who had never doubted her right to be obeyed. Their courtship was conducted amidst the rebuilding of the world, their romance unfolding against the backdrop of creation itself being reshaped according to Zeus's vision. He wooed her with gifts that were themselves acts of divine creation. Flowers that bloomed in colors that had never existed before, jewels that captured and reflected the light of stars, perfumes distilled from the essence of spring itself. Their wedding was an event that involved all of creation. The very elements seemed to celebrate as Zeus and Hera spoke their vows. The wind carried the scent of every flower that had ever bloomed, while the sea sang with voices that had never been heard before and would never be heard again. The earth itself produced gifts for the bride, trees that bore golden fruit, springs that flowed with water that could heal any wound, gardens where plants grew in patterns too beautiful and complex for mortal minds to fully appreciate. As queen of the gods, Hera brought to Olympus her own divine authority and wisdom. She became the protector of marriage and family, the guardian of the sacred bonds that held mortal society together. Her palace on Olympus was a place of remarkable beauty, filled with peacocks whose tail feathers held eyes that could see across vast distances and whose calls could summon the winds themselves. Yet even as Zeus loved Hera and honored her as his queen, his nature as a god of sky and storm led him to adventures and encounters that would strain their marriage and create some of the most dramatic stories in all of mythology. Zeus's attractions were not limited to the divine realm. He found himself drawn to mortal women whose beauty or virtue caught his attention, leading to romantic pursuits that required all his cunning and shape-shifting abilities to accomplish. One of the most famous of these encounters involved Europa, a Phoenician princess whose beauty was so renowned that it reached even the heights of Olympus. Zeus, observing her from his throne among the clouds, was struck not just by her physical beauty, but by the grace with which she moved and the kindness she showed to those around her. Unable to approach her directly without causing fear or complications, Zeus transformed himself into a magnificent white bull. This was no ordinary bovine but a creature of impossible beauty, with fur as soft as silk and eyes that held depths of intelligence clearly beyond those of any earthly animal. The bull appeared to Europa as she walked along the seashore with her companions, approaching with such gentleness that she felt no fear. The transformation was one of Zeus's most masterful, requiring him to compress his vast divine essence into the form of a mortal creature while retaining enough of his power to maintain the illusion and accomplish his purpose. Every aspect of the bull's appearance was crafted with care. Its horns were polished to a shine that rivaled silver, its hooves seemed carved from obsidian, and its breath carried the scent of flowers from meadows that existed only in the realm of the gods. Europa, charmed by the creature's beauty and apparent tameness, began to pet and speak to it as she might to any gentle animal. The bull responded with behavior that was affectionate without being threatening, gradually earning her trust. When she finally climbed onto its back, perhaps motivated by curiosity or simple playfulness, Zeus revealed the true nature of his plan. With Europa secure on his back, the bull waded into the sea and began to swim with powerful strokes that carried them far from shore. Only when they were well away from her homeland did Zeus reveal his true identity, transforming back into his divine form in a display of light and power that left Europa breathless with wonder and perhaps a touch of fear. The island where Zeus brought Europa became a place of legendary beauty under his influence. He caused springs of sweet water to emerge from the rocky ground, created groves of fruit trees that bore the most delicious produce, and filled the air with the songs of birds whose melodies could inspire joy in even the most sorrowful heart. There, Europa lived as Zeus's beloved, bearing him children who would themselves become legendary figures. Yet Zeus's relationship with Europa, like many of his mortal loves, was marked by both passion and tragedy. The very nature of the divine meant that his attention, however intense, could not remain focused on any single mortal indefinitely. The responsibilities of ruling the cosmos, the constant demands of other gods and mortals seeking his attention, and perhaps simply the restless nature that led him to such adventures in the first place, all conspired to make these relationships temporary, no matter how deeply felt they might be in the moment. This pattern would repeat itself many times throughout Zeus's reign. There was Leda, whom he approached in the form of a swan, creating one of the most beautiful and mysterious stories of transformation and love. The encounter took place beside a quiet lake at twilight, when the boundary between day and night made the world seem magical and full of possibility. Zeus, in his swan form, was a creature of impossible grace. His feathers pure white and so soft they seemed to be made of the clouds themselves. His neck curved with elegant perfection, and his eyes held the depth of the sky at midnight. When he appeared to Leda, swimming silently across the dark water, she was immediately enchanted by his beauty. The swan approached her without fear, and she found herself drawn to touch its perfect feathers. The encounter that followed was both tender and transcendent, a meeting of mortal and divine that left Leda forever changed. From this union came children who would shape the course of history: Helen, whose beauty would launch 1,000 ships, and the twins Castor and Pollux, who would become protectors of sailors and symbols of brotherly love. Another transformation led Zeus to Danae, a princess locked away in a bronze tower by her father, who feared a prophecy that her son would kill him. No mortal man could reach Danae in her prison, but Zeus came to her as a shower of golden rain, seeping through the smallest gaps in her confinement to appear before her in a form that was both beautiful and impossible. The golden rain was not merely a disguise but a manifestation of Zeus's most essential nature: his ability to be both substance and energy, both present and everywhere at once. Each drop of the golden shower carried within it a spark of divine consciousness, so that Danae found herself surrounded not just by precious metal, but by the very essence of the god himself. From this encounter came Perseus, the hero who would slay the Gorgon Medusa and rescue Andromeda from a sea monster. The irony that the child born from Zeus's golden rain would fulfill the very prophecy his mother's father had tried to prevent was not lost on those who heard the tale, serving as a reminder that fate finds a way to fulfill itself regardless of mortal attempts at prevention. Zeus's encounter with Io demonstrated another aspect of his complex nature: his willingness to go to great lengths to protect those he loved, even when that protection required difficult sacrifices. Io was a priestess of Hera, beautiful and devoted to her service, which made Zeus's attraction to her particularly complicated. When Hera began to suspect Zeus's interest in Io, he transformed the young woman into a white heifer to hide her from his wife's jealous gaze. The transformation was both a protection and a curse, preserving Io's life but trapping her in a form that could not speak or express the thoughts and feelings that remained fully human within the animal body. Hera, not fooled by the deception, demanded the heifer as a gift and set the 100-eyed giant Argus to watch over it constantly. Zeus, Unable to reclaim Io directly without revealing the truth and endangering her further, was forced to employ cunning once again. He sent Hermes, the messenger god, to lull Argus to sleep with stories and music, then kill the giant and free Io. But Hera's revenge was not finished. She sent a gadfly to torment the heifer Io, driving her to wander across the known world in a desperate attempt to escape the stinging insect. Io's journey became a legend in itself, as she traveled through lands that would later be named for her passage, finally reaching Egypt where Zeus was able to restore her human form and where she became the ancestor of future heroes. These stories of Zeus's various loves and transformations reveal important truths about his character and the nature of divine power itself. His ability to take any form, bull, swan, shower of gold, or countless others, represented not just magical ability but a fundamental aspect of his relationship with creation. As king of the gods, Zeus was connected to all aspects of existence, able to manifest in whatever form was necessary to accomplish his purposes. Yet these same stories also revealed the complications and sometimes tragic consequences of divine involvement in mortal affairs. Zeus's loves, however genuine they might be in the moment, inevitably brought both blessing and curse to their recipients. The women he loved often gained children who would become great heroes or founders of noble lines, but they also frequently faced persecution from Hera's jealousy or the simple impossibility of maintaining a relationship between mortal and immortal beings. Hera herself was both victim and perpetrator in these complex relationships. Her jealousy was legendary and often resulted in punishment for Zeus's lovers that was far more severe than their actual crimes warranted. Yet her anger was understandable. As queen of the gods and protector of marriage, she found her husband's infidelities to be not just personal betrayals, but attacks on the very institutions she was sworn to protect. The relationship between Zeus and Hera became one of the most complex and psychologically rich partnerships in all of mythology. They loved each other deeply, yet their marriage was marked by conflict that sometimes escalated to cosmic proportions. Their arguments could shake the foundations of Olympus, while their reconciliations could bring spring to the earth and fair weather to the skies. Despite their conflicts, Zeus and Hera were effective partners in ruling the divine realm. Hera's wisdom and political acumen complemented Zeus's power and vision, creating a partnership that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. She managed many of the day-to-day aspects of divine governance, handled diplomatic relationships with other pantheons of gods, and served as Zeus's most trusted advisor on matters requiring both power and subtlety. Together, they presided over a golden age of divine rule that saw the establishment of many institutions and customs that would endure for millennia. The great festivals held in their honor brought gods and mortals together in celebration, creating bonds of mutual respect and understanding that strengthened the cosmic order. The children of Zeus, born from his various relationships both divine and mortal, became some of the most important figures in mythology and religion. Each child inherited aspects of their father's power while developing their own unique abilities and areas of influence. Apollo, born to the Titaness Leto, became the god of music, poetry, prophecy, and the sun itself. His birth was complicated by Hera's jealousy. She forbade any land from offering Leto sanctuary when she was ready to give birth. Only the floating island of Delos, which was not technically part of any country, dared to welcome her. There, in pain and isolation, Leto gave birth to Apollo and his twin sister Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon. Apollo inherited his father's beauty and authority, but channeled these qualities into artistic and intellectual pursuits. His lyre could charm even the stones, and his prophecies, delivered through the oracle at Delphi, guided mortals in their most important decisions. The temple at Delphi became one of the most sacred sites in the ancient world, a place where Zeus's divine wisdom was made accessible to human understanding through his son's prophetic gifts. Artemis, Apollo's twin, chose a path that emphasized independence and connection to the natural world. She asked Zeus to grant her eternal virginity and dominion over all wild creatures, requests that he granted lovingly. Artemis became the protector of young girls and the patron of hunters, but only those who hunted with respect for their prey and the natural order. Athena's birth was perhaps the most unusual of all Zeus's children. She sprang fully grown from his head, already armed and armored, after Zeus had swallowed her mother Metis to prevent a prophecy that their child would overthrow him. The irony was that Athena became one of Zeus's most loyal and valuable allies, serving as goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts. The birth itself was a spectacle that amazed even the other gods. Zeus began to suffer terrible headaches that grew worse until Hephaestus, the smith god, was called upon to split his skull with an axe. From the opening emerged Athena, giving a war cry that shook all of Olympus and announcing her presence with a display of divine power that left no doubt about her formidable nature. Athena became Zeus's favorite child, the one he trusted most completely, and the one whose counsel he sought in the most difficult situations. She inherited his wisdom and strategic thinking but applied these qualities with a precision and focus that sometimes exceeded even her father's capabilities. Dionysus, the god of wine and celebration, was born from one of Zeus's most unusual romantic adventures. His mother was Semele, a mortal princess who made the mistake of asking to see Zeus in his true divine form. The request was impossible to refuse once made, but it was also fatal to mortals. Semele was killed by the very sight of Zeus's unveiled divinity. Zeus, however, rescued the unborn Dionysus from his mother's womb and sewed the child into his own thigh, where the young god completed his development. This unusual birth gave Dionysus a unique perspective on existence, making him a bridge between the divine and mortal worlds in ways that other gods could never achieve. Dionysus grew to become one of the most complex and fascinating of Zeus's children. He brought the gift of wine to mortals, but with it came both ecstasy and danger. His festivals were celebrations of life's most intense pleasures, but they could also become occasions of excess that led to tragedy. Through Dionysus, Zeus taught mortals that joy and sorrow were often intertwined, and that the greatest pleasures in life carried within them the seeds of their own destruction. Hermes, born to the nymph Maia, inherited his father's cunning and love of clever solutions to difficult problems. Even as an infant, Hermes displayed remarkable intelligence and mischievous nature. On the day of his birth, he stole Apollo's cattle, demonstrating both his skill at theft and his ability to negotiate when caught. Zeus, rather than punishing Hermes for his theft, was delighted by his son's cleverness and appointed him as messenger of the gods. Hermes became the divine herald, responsible for carrying Zeus's commands throughout the cosmos and serving as a diplomatic link between the various realms of existence. The winged sandals and caduceus that became Hermes's symbols were gifts from Zeus, tokens of both affection and recognition of his son's unique abilities. Hermes could travel faster than thought itself, crossing the boundaries between mortal and divine realms with ease, making him indispensable for maintaining communication across Zeus's vast domain. Ares, the god of war, represented a different aspect of Zeus's nature, the raw, sometimes destructive power that was necessary to maintain order but dangerous if left unchecked. Born to Zeus and Hera, Ares inherited both his father's strength and his mother's passionate nature, creating a deity whose presence on the battlefield could turn the tide of any conflict. Yet Zeus's relationship with Ares was complicated by the god of war's impulsive nature and tendency toward unnecessary violence. Unlike Athena, who represented strategic warfare and just conflict, Ares embodied the brutal, chaotic aspects of battle that Zeus found both necessary and troubling. Despite his reservations about some of Ares's methods, Zeus recognized the importance of his son's role in the cosmic order. War, however regrettable, was sometimes necessary to prevent greater evils or to protect the innocent. Ares served as the divine embodiment of this harsh reality, carrying out Zeus's will even when that will involve difficult and morally complex decisions. Hephaestus, the smith god, was born with physical imperfections that set him apart from his perfectly beautiful divine family. Some stories say he was born lame, others that he was injured when Zeus threw him from Olympus during a family argument. Regardless of the cause, Hephaestus's disabilities taught Zeus important lessons about the nature of beauty and worth. Rather than being diminished by his physical limitations, Hephaestus became the most skilled craftsman among the gods. His forges produced weapons and artifacts of incredible beauty and power, including Zeus's own thunderbolts. The god's skill at creation and his ability to find beauty in function rather than mere appearance made him one of Zeus's most valued children. Through Hephaestus, Zeus learned that perfection could take many forms, and that sometimes the greatest strength came from overcoming adversity rather than from natural gifts. The smith god's workshop became a place where broken things were made whole, where raw materials were transformed into objects of beauty and utility, serving as a metaphor for the transformative power of divine will. The story of Persephone, though she was not Zeus's daughter but his brother Hades's queen, involved Zeus in one of the most important decisions of his reign. When Hades fell in love with Persephone and abducted her to be his bride, her mother Demeter's grief caused all growing things to wither and die. Zeus found himself caught between his brother's desires and the needs of mortals who depended on Demeter's gifts for survival. The solution he crafted, allowing Persephone to spend part of each year in the underworld with Hades and part on Earth with her mother, became the mythological explanation for the changing seasons and demonstrated Zeus's ability to find compromises that served multiple interests. This decision revealed another crucial aspect of Zeus's character as a ruler, his understanding that perfect solutions were rarely possible, and that effective leadership often required accepting partial victories and complex arrangements that no one found entirely satisfactory but everyone could live with. The story also showed Zeus's recognition of the importance of balance in all things. The cycle of seasons, with its alternation between growth and dormancy, abundance and scarcity, reflected deeper truths about the nature of existence itself. Nothing could remain in one state forever. Change was not only inevitable but necessary for the health of the cosmic order. Zeus's role as father to so many diverse children placed him at the center of an intricate web of relationships and responsibilities that extended throughout the divine and mortal realms. Each child represented different aspects of his own nature, different ways of expressing divine power and influence. Through Apollo, Zeus's love of beauty and harmony found expression in music and art. Through Athena, his wisdom and strategic thinking influenced mortal civilization and just warfare. Through Dionysus, his understanding of life's complexities brought both joy and sorrow to human experience. Through Hermes, his cunning and communication skills maintained order across vast distances and between different realms of existence. Even his more problematic children, like Ares with his love of conflict, served important functions in the cosmic order. Zeus learned to work with each child's nature rather than trying to change it, finding ways to channel even troublesome tendencies toward constructive ends. This approach to parenting reflected Zeus's broader philosophy of leadership. Rather than demanding conformity or trying to eliminate all sources of potential conflict, he sought to create systems where different forces could coexist and even complement each other. The result was a divine family that was complex and sometimes troubled, but also remarkably creative and effective at governing the cosmos. The festivals and rituals that mortals developed to honor Zeus and his children became important institutions that brought communities together and reinforced social bonds. The Olympic Games, held in Zeus's honor, celebrated physical excellence, while also providing a peaceful outlet for competitive instincts that might otherwise lead to warfare. The games themselves were more than mere athletic competitions. They were religious festivals that honored the king of the gods while also celebrating human achievement and potential. Athletes from across the known world would gather to compete in events that tested strength, speed, skill, and endurance, creating a temporary community bound together by shared purpose and mutual respect. Zeus's presence at these games was considered so real and immediate that competitors would swear sacred oaths before his altar, knowing that any deception or cheating would bring down divine punishment. The olive wreaths awarded to victors were more than simple prizes. They were tokens of Zeus's approval, symbols of achievement that carried religious as well as athletic significance. The sanctuary at Olympia, where the games were held, became one of the most important religious sites in the ancient world. The massive statue of Zeus that stood in his temple there was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, a masterpiece of art and craftsmanship that seemed to capture something of the god's actual presence. The statue, created by the sculptor Phidias, was made of gold and ivory and stood over 40 feet tall. Visitors who saw it reported being overwhelmed by a sense of divine presence, as though they were standing in the actual presence of the king of the gods rather than merely viewing a representation of him. Zeus's influence on mortal civilization extended far beyond athletics and religious festivals. As the god of justice and divine law, he established principles that became the foundation of legal systems throughout the ancient world. The concept that even kings were subject to divine justice, that oaths were sacred and binding, and that hospitality toward strangers was a sacred duty. All of these ideas flowed from Zeus's divine nature and his role as cosmic ruler. The notion of xenia, or guest friendship, was perhaps one of Zeus's most important contributions to human civilization. This sacred law required hosts to provide food, shelter, and protection to travelers, while guests were obligated to respect their hosts and not abuse their hospitality. Violations of xenia were considered among the most serious offenses possible, often drawing Zeus's direct intervention and punishment. The story of Odysseus's long journey home from Troy illustrates both the importance of xenia and the consequences of violating it. When Penelope's suitors consumed Odysseus's wealth and threatened his family, they committed a grave offense against the laws of hospitality. Zeus's eventual support for Odysseus's revenge was not merely personal favor but divine justice, ensuring that cosmic law was upheld. Similarly, the destruction of Troy itself was partly attributed to Paris's violation of xenia when he abducted Helen while being hosted by her husband Menelaus. The war that followed, with all its suffering and heroism, was seen as Zeus's way of restoring the balance that had been disrupted by this fundamental breach of divine law. Zeus's role as protector of oaths made him central to all forms of formal agreement between mortals. Treaties between cities, marriage contracts, business partnerships, and political alliances were all sworn in his name, with the understanding that he would punish those who broke their word. This divine guarantee made complex civilization possible by creating trust between parties who might otherwise have no reason to believe each other's promises. The thunderbolt remains Zeus's most visible symbol of power, but its meaning evolved as his reign continued. What had begun as a weapon of war became a symbol of divine justice, a reminder that ultimate authority resided not with mortal rulers but with the cosmic order itself. When lightning struck, mortals saw it as a sign of Zeus's presence and a reminder of the power that maintained universal law. Yet Zeus's thunderbolts were not merely instruments of punishment. They could also bring revelation and transformation. The story of the prophet Tiresias, who was struck by lightning and transformed from man to woman and back again, demonstrated that Zeus's power could expand understanding rather than simply destroy. Through this transformation, Tiresias gained unique insights into both masculine and feminine experience, making him one of the wisest seers in the ancient world. The dual nature of Zeus's power, its capacity for both destruction and creation, punishment and enlightenment, reflected the complex reality of divine authority itself. True power, Zeus understood, was not simply the ability to force compliance but the wisdom to know when force was necessary and when mercy would be more effective. This understanding led Zeus to develop what might be called a philosophy of governance that balanced strict justice with compassionate flexibility. He established laws that were clear and consistent, but he also recognized that circumstances could arise that required exceptions or creative interpretations. The key was ensuring that any deviation from standard practice served the greater good rather than personal interest. The concept of hubris, excessive pride that led mortals to challenge the gods, became central to Zeus's system of cosmic justice. Those who forgot their place in the universal order, who believed their achievements made them equal to the divine, would face correction that reminded them of their limitations. Yet even these punishments were ultimately educational, designed to restore proper understanding rather than simply to inflict suffering. The story of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun despite his father's warnings, became a classic example of hubris and its consequences. Though Zeus was not directly involved in Icarus's fall, the young man's fate was seen as an example of the divine principle that mortals who exceeded their proper bounds would face inevitable correction. Similarly, the tale of King Bellerophon, who attempted to ride the winged horse Pegasus to Olympus itself, demonstrated that even great heroes could fall victim to excessive pride. Zeus's response, causing Pegasus to throw his rider, was not merely punitive but corrective, a reminder that the boundary between mortal and divine must be respected. These stories served as moral instruction for generations of mortals, teaching them to strive for excellence while maintaining proper humility. Zeus's justice was not arbitrary but followed consistent principles that could be understood and followed by those who paid attention to divine will. The oracle at Delphi, speaking for Apollo but ultimately conveying Zeus's wisdom, became the most important source of divine guidance for mortals facing difficult decisions. The famous inscription, "Know thyself," carved at the temple entrance encapsulated Zeus's fundamental message. True wisdom began with honest self-assessment and recognition of one's place in the cosmic order. The oracles delivered at Delphi were often cryptic, requiring interpretation and careful thought rather than providing simple answers. This approach reflected Zeus's understanding that true learning came through struggle and contemplation rather than passive acceptance of external authority. The divine guidance was available, but mortals had to work to understand and apply it properly. Kings and common citizens alike sought the oracle's counsel, creating a democratization of divine wisdom that was revolutionary for its time. Zeus's guidance was not reserved for royalty or priests, but was available to anyone willing to make the journey to Delphi and offer appropriate sacrifices. This accessibility reflected his role as king of all, not just ruler of the divine realm. The complex relationship between fate and free will became one of the most profound aspects of Zeus's cosmic governance. As king of the gods, he had the power to shape events, yet he also recognized that some things were determined by forces beyond even his control. The Fates, three ancient goddesses who spun, measured, and cut the threads of destiny, operated according to laws that predated Zeus's reign and continued to function independently of his will. This limitation on Zeus's power was not a weakness but a strength. By accepting that he could not control everything, he avoided the trap of absolute tyranny that had destroyed his father Kronos. Instead, he learned to work with the existing cosmic forces, finding ways to achieve his goals while respecting the fundamental laws that governed reality itself. The interplay between divine will and predetermined fate created a complex moral landscape where mortals had genuine choices and real responsibility for their actions, yet also operated within constraints that gave their lives meaning and structure. Heroes could achieve greatness through their own efforts, but they could not escape the basic parameters of their existence. This balance between freedom and constraint became one of Zeus's greatest achievements as a ruler. Mortals were neither puppets dancing to divine whims nor completely autonomous beings responsible for every aspect of their existence. They lived in a middle realm where their choices mattered but where they also received guidance and support from powers greater than themselves. The heroic age, when mortals like Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus performed deeds of legendary courage and skill, represented the flowering of this divine mortal partnership. These heroes were often Zeus's own children or enjoyed his particular favor, but their achievements were genuinely their own. The god provided opportunities and support, but the heroes had to find the courage and skill to seize those opportunities. Heracles, perhaps the greatest of all mortal heroes, exemplified both the potential and the challenges of being Zeus's son. His incredible strength and heroic achievements were balanced by personal struggles and tragic mistakes that reminded everyone that even the mightiest heroes remained fundamentally human. The 12 labors of Heracles, imposed as punishment for a crime committed in a fit of divine madness, became a model for how suffering could be transformed into achievement. Each labor required Heracles to overcome seemingly impossible challenges, forcing him to develop not just physical strength but courage, cunning, and perseverance. Zeus's relationship with Heracles was complex, mixing paternal love with divine justice. He could not simply excuse his son from the consequences of his actions, but he could ensure that those consequences became opportunities for growth and redemption. The labors that seemed like punishments became the very achievements that earned Heracles immortality and a place among the gods. The story of Heracles also illustrated Zeus's understanding that true heroism required more than natural gifts or divine favor. The greatest heroes were those who faced their weaknesses honestly and worked to overcome them. Heracles' struggles with anger and his tendency toward violence became part of his heroic journey, challenges he had to master rather than simply accept. When Heracles finally died, consumed by poison from the Hydra he had killed during his labors, Zeus welcomed him to Olympus as a full god rather than merely a hero. This transformation represented the completion of a journey that had begun with divine heritage but achieved its goal through mortal effort and suffering. The apotheosis of Heracles established an important precedent in Zeus's reign, the possibility that mortals could earn divinity through exceptional achievement and moral development. This was not automatic inheritance but a reward for those who transcended normal human limitations through their own efforts while maintaining respect for divine authority. Other heroes who achieved divine status or special favor from Zeus shared this pattern of combining natural gifts with hard-won wisdom and moral growth. Perseus, who slayed Medusa and rescued Andromeda, demonstrated courage and cleverness while also showing mercy and justice. Theseus, who founded Athens and established its democratic institutions, proved that heroism could be expressed through wise governance as well as physical prowess. The stories of these heroes provided models for mortal behavior while also illustrating the complex relationship between divine and human agency. Zeus did not create puppet heroes but rather provided the conditions and opportunities for exceptional individuals to achieve greatness through their own choices and efforts. As Zeus's reign continued through the ages, his understanding of leadership and justice continued to evolve. The early period of his rule, marked by cosmic battles and the establishment of fundamental laws, gave way to a more nuanced approach that recognized the complexity of moral decision-making and the importance of context in determining appropriate responses to challenging situations. The Trojan War, one of the most significant events of the heroic age, tested Zeus's wisdom and restraint in ways that earlier conflicts had not. The war arose from a complex web of divine and mortal motivations: Paris's violation of Xenia, Aphrodite's promise to help him win Helen's love, and the competing interests of various gods who supported different sides in the conflict. Zeus found himself in the difficult position of needing to allow the war to proceed while also ensuring that it served the larger purposes of cosmic justice. He could not prevent the conflict entirely without violating his own principles about the importance of consequences for actions. Yet he also could not allow it to continue indefinitely without causing unnecessary suffering to innocents. The solution Zeus crafted involved careful management of the war's progress, ensuring that it achieved its moral purposes, punishing violations of divine law, and demonstrating the consequences of hubris, while limiting its duration and ultimate scope. He intervened at crucial moments to prevent the complete destruction of either side, maintaining a balance that served justice without descending into mere vengeance. This balance between freedom and constraint became one of Zeus's greatest achievements as a ruler. Mortals were neither puppets dancing to divine whims nor completely autonomous beings responsible for every aspect of their existence. They lived in a middle realm where their choices mattered but where they also received guidance and support from powers greater than themselves. The heroic age, when mortals like Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus performed deeds of legendary courage and skill, represented the flowering of this divine mortal partnership. These heroes were often Zeus's own children or enjoyed his particular favor, but their achievements were genuinely their own. The god provided opportunities and support, but the heroes had to find the courage and skill to seize those opportunities. Heracles, perhaps the greatest of all mortal heroes, exemplified both the potential and the challenges of being Zeus's son. His incredible strength and heroic achievements were balanced by personal struggles and tragic mistakes that reminded everyone that even the mightiest heroes remained fundamentally human. The 12 labors of Heracles, imposed as punishment for a crime committed in a fit of divine madness, became a model for how suffering could be transformed into achievement. Each labor required Heracles to overcome seemingly impossible challenges, forcing him to develop not just physical strength but courage, cunning, and perseverance. Zeus's relationship with Heracles was complex, mixing paternal love with divine justice. He could not simply excuse his son from the consequences of his actions, but he could ensure that those consequences became opportunities for growth and redemption. The labors that seemed like punishments became the very achievements that earned Heracles immortality and a place among the gods. The story of Heracles also illustrated Zeus's understanding that true heroism required more than natural gifts or divine favor. The greatest heroes were those who faced their weaknesses honestly and worked to overcome them. Heracles' struggles with anger and his tendency toward violence became part of his heroic journey, challenges he had to master rather than simply accept. When Heracles finally died, consumed by poison from the Hydra he had killed during his labors, Zeus welcomed him to Olympus as a full god rather than merely a hero. This transformation represented the completion of a journey that had begun with divine heritage but achieved its goal through mortal effort and suffering. The apotheosis of Heracles established an important precedent in Zeus's reign, the possibility that mortals could earn divinity through exceptional achievement and moral development. This was not automatic inheritance but a reward for those who transcended normal human limitations through their own efforts while maintaining respect for divine authority. Other heroes who achieved divine status or special favor from Zeus shared this pattern of combining natural gifts with hard-won wisdom and moral growth. Perseus, who slayed Medusa and rescued Andromeda, demonstrated courage and cleverness while also showing mercy and justice. Theseus, who founded Athens and established its democratic institutions, proved that heroism could be expressed through wise governance as well as physical prowess. The stories of these heroes provided models for mortal behavior while also illustrating the complex relationship between divine and human agency. Zeus did not create puppet heroes but rather provided the conditions and opportunities for exceptional individuals to achieve greatness through their own choices and efforts. As Zeus's reign continued through the ages, his understanding of leadership and justice continued to evolve. The early period of his rule, marked by cosmic battles and the establishment of fundamental laws, gave way to a more nuanced approach that recognized the complexity of moral decision-making and the importance of context in determining appropriate responses to challenging situations. The Trojan War, one of the most significant events of the heroic age, tested Zeus's wisdom and restraint in ways that earlier conflicts had not. The war arose from a complex web of divine and mortal motivations: Paris's violation of Xenia, Aphrodite's promise to help him win Helen's love, and the competing interests of various gods who supported different sides in the conflict. Zeus found himself in the difficult position of needing to allow the war to proceed while also ensuring that it served the larger purposes of cosmic justice. He could not prevent the conflict entirely without violating his own principles about the importance of consequences for actions. Yet he also could not allow it to continue indefinitely without causing unnecessary suffering to innocents. The solution Zeus crafted involved careful management of the war's progress, ensuring that it achieved its moral purposes, punishing violations of divine law, and demonstrating the consequences of hubris, while limiting its duration and ultimate scope. He intervened at crucial moments to prevent the complete destruction of either side, maintaining a balance that served justice without descending into mere vengeance. The great temple of Zeus at Olympia combined both aspects in its design and function. The massive statue of the god conveyed his awesome power and cosmic authority, inspiring awe and reverence in all who saw it. Yet the temple also served as a place where individual worshippers could offer personal prayers and seek divine guidance for their private concerns. The Olympic Games themselves embodied this same duality. They were grand celebrations of human excellence that honored Zeus as the supreme deity, but they also provided opportunities for individual athletes to seek divine favor and demonstrate their personal devotion through their performances. The evolution of Zeus's worship and mythology over the centuries showed how a divine figure could remain essentially consistent while also adapting to changing human needs and understanding. The core elements of his character, his role as king of the gods, his association with justice and law, his complex relationship with both divine and mortal beings, remained constant throughout the classical period. Yet the specific ways in which these elements were understood and expressed changed as human civilization became more sophisticated. Early worship focused primarily on Zeus's power and his ability to provide protection and prosperity. Later developments emphasized his role as a source of wisdom and moral guidance, reflecting humanity's growing interest in ethical questions and philosophical understanding. The mystery religions that emerged in the later classical period often incorporated Zeus into their complex theological systems, seeing him as one aspect of a more comprehensive divine reality that included both personal and impersonal elements. These traditions recognized that Zeus's mythology contained profound truths about the nature of existence and the human condition, truths that could be understood on multiple levels depending on the spiritual development of the individual believer. The artistic and literary traditions that grew up around Zeus's mythology became some of the greatest achievements of ancient civilization. Poets like Homer and Hesiod created epic narratives that captured both the grandeur and the complexity of his character. Sculptors and architects created works that attempted to convey something of his divine presence and authority. These artistic achievements were not mere decoration or entertainment, but serious attempts to understand and communicate essential truths about the nature of divinity and its relationship to human existence. The best works succeeded in creating experiences that were both aesthetically beautiful and spiritually meaningful, helping their audiences to deeper understanding of cosmic order and their place within it. The influence of Zeus's mythology extended far beyond the ancient world, shaping the development of Western literature, art, philosophy, and religious thought for centuries to come. The archetypal figure of the Sky Father, the wise ruler who balanced justice with mercy, the complex deity who embodied both personal care and cosmic law, all of these elements became part of the cultural DNA that influenced later civilizations. The Roman identification of Zeus with Jupiter represented both continuity and adaptation, showing how divine archetypes could be translated across cultural boundaries while maintaining their essential character. Jupiter inherited Zeus's role as king of the gods and source of cosmic justice, but he also took on distinctively Roman characteristics that reflected the values and concerns of a different civilization. Christian theology, while obviously distinct from Greek polytheism, nonetheless showed the influence of Zeus's mythology in its conception of divine authority, cosmic justice, and the complex relationship between divine sovereignty and human freedom. The theological debates about predestination and free will that occupied Christian thinkers for centuries echoed many of the same concerns that had been explored in Zeus's mythology. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical mythology brought renewed attention to Zeus's stories and their philosophical implications. Artists and writers found in these ancient tales themes and images that spoke to their own concerns about power, justice, love, and the human condition. The result was a flowering of artistic achievement that drew inspiration from ancient sources while creating works that were distinctively modern. Modern psychology, particularly the work of Carl Jung and his followers, found in Zeus's mythology rich material for understanding universal patterns of human behavior and motivation. The archetypal figure of the powerful father, the complex relationships between different aspects of the psyche, the tension between order and chaos, all of these themes that appeared in Zeus's stories seem to reflect deep structures of human consciousness. Contemporary literature and popular culture continue to draw on Zeus's mythology, finding in these ancient stories themes and characters that remain relevant to modern concerns. The figure of the flawed but ultimately benevolent authority figure, the complex family dynamics of the divine realm, the ongoing struggle between justice and mercy, all of these elements continue to resonate with contemporary audiences. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of Zeus's mythology lies not in its specific influence on later cultures, but in its demonstration of humanity's capacity to create meaning through storytelling. The stories of Zeus and his family, his loves and his conflicts, his struggles to govern both gods and mortals, represent some of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated attempts to understand the fundamental questions of existence. What is justice? How should power be exercised? What is the relationship between the individual and the cosmos? How can order be maintained without destroying freedom? These questions remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece, and Zeus's mythology continues to offer insights and perspectives that can inform contemporary discussion of these eternal issues. The specific details of his stories may seem remote from modern experience, but the underlying concerns they address are timeless. The figure of Zeus, in all his complexity and contradiction, stands as a testament to the human need to imagine divine authority that is both powerful and compassionate, both just and merciful, both transcendent and personally engaged with the world. His mythology suggests that ultimate reality must be complex enough to encompass the full range of human experience while also being coherent enough to provide meaningful guidance for human action. In the end, Zeus's greatest achievement may have been not any specific act of creation or governance, but rather his demonstration that power, to be truly effective and just, must be exercised with wisdom, restraint, and genuine concern for the welfare of those subject to it. His reign showed that authority without accountability leads to tyranny, while power without responsibility leads to chaos. The king of the gods, seated on his throne of lapis lazuli with thunderbolts at his command and the wisdom of ages in his mind, remains one of humanity's most compelling images of what divine authority might look like when it is exercised with both strength and compassion. His story continues to inspire and challenge us to think more deeply about the nature of power, justice, and the proper relationship between the rulers and the ruled. As the ages passed and mortals looked to the heavens, they saw in the lightning flash and heard in the thunder's roar not just the raw power of nature, but the voice of Zeus himself, complex, sometimes contradictory, but always ultimately concerned with maintaining the cosmic order that allowed both gods and mortals to flourish in their proper spheres. His legacy endures not in spite of his contradictions, but because of them, reminding us that true greatness lies not in perfection, but in the ongoing struggle to balance competing values and responsibilities in service of the greater good.